Hello everybody, today on the channel I am revisiting the Morgan Plus 6, the car that ushered the firm into a new and exciting era. But now all the hubbub has died down, what's it actually like? And is it still worth considering? And most importantly, worth your money? What have we got here today? This is the relatively new Morgan Plus 6. Introduced in 2020, it is a member of the new CX generation of Morgan cars. That stands for vehicles introduced after their 110th anniversary, the company having been founded in 1909. And the significance of this is not just as a milestone, but also it denotes the platform on which this car is built. Now, it's a common misconception, but no Morgan actually ever had a wooden chassis. However, it is true to say that what they were using wasn't exactly space age. It was a very simple steel affair. But this one is almost as modern as it gets, because what we have underpinning this and its smaller brother, the Plus 4, is a bonded and extruded aluminium platform. The same fundamental technology that Lotus and Aston Martin, as well as others, have been using now for a couple of decades with great success. Now, there is a good chance that the car you might most closely associate Morgan with is a three-wheeler. It is actually how the company began all those years ago, and recently they did introduce a modern version of that same concept to rather surprising effect. People loved it. Even though it is wild, wacky and dangerous in equal measure, it is a car packed with charm. But even in the world of Morgan, rather impractical. You'll struggle to get two people in it, and it's not exactly something you want to live with on a daily basis. And so, for a very long time now, Morgan have also made four-wheelers for those that don't want to put up with a three. This is where the 4-4 designation came from, 4 wheels and 4 cylinders. Today you have the Plus 4 and this the Plus 6. The difference, of course, being in the engine. This has the BMW B58, the 3-litre straight-six twin-scroll turbo-powered monster of an engine that you'll also find in the likes of the M240i, the Z4, and of course the Supra. It makes 335 horsepower and 369 pounds-feet of torque. That's 500 newton-meters. And that's enough to give the M240i considerable performance. A car that weighs over 300 kilos more than this, which tips the scales at 1,090 kilos dry. So in the real world, when ready to go out on the road, it's somewhere between 1,150 and 1,200 kilos. It is not slow, this car. Now, unfortunately, if you do want to go for the 6-cylinder, you have just the one choice of gearbox, the excellent ZF 8-speed. And the reason I say unfortunate is because if you go for the 4-cylinder, you can have a manual, which is the gearbox I know everybody expects in a car like this. But more than that, if you do go for an automatic, you get this BMW gear lever down here that nobody likes, and unfortunately Morgan know that nobody likes it. There is just nothing they can do about it, because it's not just a stick. There's electronics and all sorts of stuff going in there, and there's homologation things going on behind the scenes, and that's why they have to use it. That's the same reason that the regular car comes with a very BMW-ish looking steering wheel. This one, though, has a much more natural looking motor liter item, which is an official option, but one that has to be dealer fit for those very same reasons. Now, my first introduction to Morgan came a number of years ago, courtesy of the lovely people at Bell & Colville down in Surrey. And I've got to say, when I drove the old, I think it might have been a 4.4, could have been a Plus 4, don't quote me, but it was the old generation of car, you felt that it was an old platform, which in some ways could trace its heritage back, I think something daft, like 60 or 70 years. then getting in the Plus 6, which to the casual observer looked like exactly the same car, I didn't really have much in the way of expectations. But when I did take it out, I was absolutely amazed, because there were lots of things I thought I was going to get out of this car. But what I wasn't expecting from it was to be a thrilling drive. And yet, I seem to recall it was. So, many years later, does it still feel that way? Let's find out. Said on numerous occasions that one of the best things about convertibles is that the car doesn't really need to be good for the experience to be good. And the thing with a Morgan is that I could easily see a great number of people buying something like this with absolutely no intention of putting their foot all the way to the ground. And one of the best things I can say about this car is that if you are that customer, or you are in that kind of mood, it's going to be pretty darn good. First off, just look at it. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Heads will turn when you drive this thing through town. And this might be one of the very few cars you can buy and spend money on and turn up at a client's house in, and they won't complain at you. In fact, the owner, the lovely Greg, just told me that recently he had to park it in a disabled space for 2 minutes to be able to get somewhere, and when he came back to it, it was surrounded by elderly folk, and he assumed that he was then going to get an immediate rollicking for his transgressions, but he in fact was surprised to hear from all of the people looking at it just how much they loved it. They were delighted to see it out and about and on the road. If someone parked their Morgan in my driveway, I don't think I'd be particularly upset. At least not for the first 5 minutes. I'd have a good look at it, look around, and then shout at them. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing, and I know it's an old shape, but I think in many ways, much like the 911, which Greg incidentally was also considering, that makes it timeless. Although, happily, unlike the Porsche, it hasn't grown by anywhere near as much over the last few decades. It has naturally got bigger in that time, which isn't always a bad thing, and even the Plus 6 is actually marginally wider, mostly in the cabin, than the Plus 4, meaning that there are reasons beyond engine to go with the larger and more expensive car. That engine, of course, is an absolute masterpiece, always has been, always will be. Any car it goes in, you have to give it a mention. It has oodles of power from just about no RPM, and given it's got no mass to drag along in this thing, it is ludicrously quick. And that's actually a problem, because you see, this car doesn't have a limited slip differential, nor would an M240i, and it doesn't have traction control. In fact, I am told that putting my foot all the way down in first is nothing short of suicide. It is apparently in the regular mode, just drive, where it is the biggest problem, because the car will be in a relatively high gear, but then when it kicks down, it'll kick down quite a few. If you're in one of the sportier modes, it's probably already in a lower gear, so therefore a little bit less likely for you to want it to kick down. You have Sport, if you move the lever over to the left, which there is kick down, I think, 2 gears, and then if you want even more, Sport Plus, which also gives you even more pops and cracks. And, you know, Sport Plus, very good way to drive this car. Does sound good, this. It's got the sports exhaust, and the valve has also been, well, jammed open, basically, but even so, it's a lovely thing. Although, you may have noticed in the drive-bys, it does whistle quite a bit. And now let's talk about what I think could be the best thing about a Morgan, the view out. It is both iconic and epic. I think it might have to be just about the greatest in automotive. There are very, very few cars that can come close to giving you the feeling that you get when you're sat in this seat. It's amazing. There is lots of car in front of you, but also the whole thing is so small. It's got the footprint of a current generation MX-5, so it doesn't feel daunting. It's just wonderful. This is, in so many ways, the perfect pub car because it looks good, it sounds good, it's got a great badge on it, and people will want to talk to you about it. So it's an excuse to stay around a little bit longer, have a dessert, and maybe an extra pint of Pepsi Max. Oh, in case you were wondering, as I've already told you, the chassis of this isn't wood. Which bit is? Well, it's the frame. It is the bit off of which most of the interior hangs. That is made of wood, and I think nearly always has been in Morgans. It's ash, and they make it in very, very traditional ways. It's a fabulous thing, and the Morgan factory tour is one I highly recommend you do. They do them frequently through the year. I organised one a while ago for members of the channel, and it's a great place, full of very curious and very cool people. And that brings with it both good and, unfortunately, a little bad. But before we get on to that, let's finish off talking about the driving dynamics. The steering is maybe not quite as brilliant as I thought. It is quite heavily weighted, but also not particularly communicative. Those who've driven a modern-day BMW in its Sport Plus setting will know what I'm talking about. The speed of it, though, is judged just about right. When you're at the national speed limit, you don't need too much in the way of turn to get yourself around a bend, and honestly, in this kind of car, I don't expect it to be the last word in involvement. And maybe it's better than it might be, but not as good, I think, as it probably should be. And I think really that's a little bit of a shame, because actually, with the new bonded aluminium chassis, double wishbone suspension on each corner, this is a car which is ultimately quite capable. But to get the most out of it, you need that safety blanket of a little bit more communication. You need to know from the car that you are doing the right thing. And it just doesn't tell you that. To then not have any form of traction or stability control does then add another layer of what if to when you're out and about. And that's unfortunate. But, in all honesty, I'm certainly piloting it with more gusto than I would any old school TVR. Brakes? Now they're good. Pedal is nice and stiff, I like that. Obviously, heel and toe is not really something you're going to do in this, being an auto, but they're decent. I like them a lot. And I think I'm likely being maybe overly harsh on this, but you know what? The sun is now out. It was raining about 10 minutes ago, and I'm happy to just put it back into drive, chill, and enjoy. It's a fabulous way to get from A to B. And incidentally, this is Greg's daily driver now. He's put 6,000 miles on it since he had it, a mixture of going to the shops and going out and about and the odd fun day out. But it unfortunately hasn't been the smoothest experience. And this is something I've heard from a lot of people that have bought a Morgan. And it's particularly unfortunate when you consider these are not cheap cars anymore. A Morgan Plus 6 starts at £93,000. And maybe it's only because the world has gone strange that doesn't sound like quite as much money as it once did. We live in an age now where a regular 911 Carrera is 100 grand. But one of these, with some spec now, is about £108,000. The options list, of course, isn't anywhere near as extensive as for, say, the Porsche, and 108 seems to be where nearly all of them come out. But that's a lot of money. Enough money, I think, that you should reasonably expect your car to work for quite a while and not have any faults. To give you some context, to date, in its 18 months and 6,000 miles, this car has had a replacement windscreen, because it cracked all on its own, 3 new wing mirrors, because they started corroding all on their own, and 3 new radiators, because they have an inherent design flaw and they fail. And I think if I'd paid £108,000 for that, I'd have been talking about them taking the car back. I mean, let's be honest here. We're talking about a car that hasn't even had its second birthday, and the factory warranty is only 2 years. To talk about corrosion of any description is mad. But apparently, whoever does these wing mirrors, if he's not been having a great week, they will start to corrode. The side of the car, there's a little bit where another patch of corrosion has started coming through. I mean, look, I know, I give McLaren a hard time about corrosion, and I've given Ferrari a bit of a hard time about corrosion. But my Ferrari at least had the decency to take 10 years to start corroding. This hasn't even taken 2. It also, as you've already heard and we've already discussed, whistles a lot. And that is apparently because something at the front just isn't quite aligned correctly. These are things that should just be correct on the car when it leaves the factory. This shouldn't be something that needs to be sorted. While it's not accurate for me to say that Greg is happy with all of these issues, he is at least happy with the service he's received, courtesy of his dealer Crazy Horse over at Bury St Edmunds. There are also a few inherent design flaws in this car, which really shouldn't be there when you consider Morgan have been working with this rough shape for, what, nearly 80 years now? And they include the fact that there is no boot. None. You've got what you'd call a parcel shelf behind you and a luggage rack on the back. And I know it looks cute and quaint and all that, and maybe if you're thinking of buying a Morgan, you love the notion, the nostalgia of getting all your luggage together and tying it to the back of the car, but, well, that's just impractical, isn't it? I certainly don't fancy the notion of strapping all of my camera kit to the back of the thing. The aerodynamics of the car also mean that once you have got yourself up to motorway speeds, it's a very blustery and noisy place to be. I mean, at 30 mile an hour, it's absolutely fine. Same really at 40, the limit we're now in. But when you get to 60, which we will in a moment, you'll find there's been a reason this whole video I've been shouting at you. And that's because, though, yes, I know you can hear me quite well and I probably don't need to, I struggle to hear myself. And that's a shame. Right, here we go, up to 60. And it takes no time to get to 60. Yeah. I've also been told that if you do want to put the roof up, which of course every Morgan owner will try and avoid, and I didn't have the heart to ask Greg to do it, well, that creaks to the extent that he carries Vaseline around so that people ask him strange and unusual questions, but mostly to stop it creaking and squeaking. And these are the things I'd maybe expect of Caterham, and I think they charge too much money for their cars. But these are double and then some. It's not good enough. Another big issue that I have with these cars, and I haven't experienced it today, but I have every other time I've driven one of these, is their ground clearance. Now, they're not particularly low cars. They certainly don't look like it, nor are they particularly long. But there is clearly something about them, I think it might even be the exhaust, that means every other time I've driven one, I've taken it through a bend or through a compression, not really expecting anything dramatic to happen, only to find that the car hits the ground in a rather unpleasant way. That's unfortunate, and just another area where you sort of think, okay guys, you went and built this whole brand new lovely chassis, but you didn't really finesse it, you didn't set it up, you didn't go out and test it, or if you did, you just smacked the ground places and went, nah, it's fine. But you know what? The funniest thing about all of this is that Greg bought this for himself as a retirement present. And naturally, one of the cars he was considering was a 911, because it's a sort of rule, isn't it? You get to a certain point in life, and for some reason we just start hankering after a Porsche. He drove one, a 992 GTS, and liked it, but didn't love it. He also considered a Lexus LC500 and liked that, but his other half didn't, and he struggled to deal with the concept of how much money Lexus wanted for one of those. How he then was okay with the concept of how much money Morgan want for one of these, which is more than you'd pay for the Lexus, I don't know, but you know, that's his problem and not mine. But the fact is, I just don't think many Porsche customers, whether diehards or casuals, are actually going to be interested or, well, really, let's be honest here, willing to put up with the compromises of a car like this. Either in its just concept, you know, effectively roof down all the time, no boot space, etc., or the lack of dealers, the fact that they're not really as well built as they should be, and all this, that and the other. I really desperately want Morgan to be one of those companies where everybody I know who has one says, yeah, you know what, the factory are the best ever, they're the most amazing, they're the most wonderful people. Yes, occasionally I get an issue, but they're fantastic. But it just seems like that's not the case. The dealers, I'm told, are very, very good. But the factory, I think they need to try better. They just don't make enough cars, really, for them to have the excuse that they needed to rush when building them. Lotus did exactly the same thing, ruined their reputation. There was once a time where if you wanted a Morgan, you had to wait some 7 years to get one. Now it's nothing like that. It's more like, I think, 12 months. And possibly because of that, maybe because the prices have gone up, they are now depreciating in a way that they didn't before. So one of these new 100-odd thousand pounds second-hand, you're looking at close to 70-odd thousand pounds. Granted, for earlier ones with some miles on, etc., etc. The Morgan used market isn't exactly enormous. But here's the point I'm trying to make, and I'm doing an awful job of it, I apologise. Porsche people not really being the right customer for a Morgan, that's not a surprise, is it really? But I think the people that would love this are those that either have or had a TVR, maybe back in the day, and they just want something a little classier, a little less shouty and showy, but that still has presence, still gets people talking, still has go in it, but is just a touch more refined. And that's what this is. This is a TVR for the man that has discovered the joy of pipe smoking. Anyway, I want to say a big thank you to Greg for bringing it out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.